Hey everyone, and welcome to my very own version of the complete guide for Alatreon, the Blazing Black Dragon. We will be discussing the Iceborne version, his behavior and weaknesses, as well as every single attack he'll use, so stay tuned, and feel free to skip to the chapter you're interested in. Let's start with a brief introduction and overview. Alatreon is an endgame elder dragon that can utilize attacks from all 5 elements: fire, ice, water, lightning, which is called thunder in this game, and dragon element. Alatreon is also able to shift between 3 elemental modes: fire active mode, ice active mode, and dragon active mode. These 3 modes will affect which elemental attacks he can use, as well as which elements he is weak to. At some point during the fight, Alatreon will shift his elemental mode by performing a powerful super move known as the Escaton Judgement, which will kill everyone in the arena unless players weaken Alatreon using elemental weapons. More on that later. Players can fight Alatreon in Iceborne if they meet the minimum requirements of Master Rank 24, after completing the Iceborne story, then following a few special assignments until they unlock Blazing Black Twilight, which is the special assignment for Alatreon, and it can only be completed once. After completing Blazing Black Twilight, players can fight Alatreon again in the repeatable event quests, the Evening Star where he starts in fire mode, and Dawn of the Death Star where he starts in ice mode. These 2 quests are on rotation every single day, so each player can only post either one of it each day, but it's different for each player, so you can join others who have the opposite quest for the day. There is also a weaker Alatreon with far less HP in the one-time special assignment, Dawn's Triumph, which is a prerequisite for the Fatalis special assignment. With the intro and overview done, let's move on to the important stuff, starting with his elemental modes and weaknesses. As mentioned before, Alatreon can switch between 3 modes, which affects the elemental attacks he can use, as well as his elemental weaknesses. You can easily tell which mode he is in by the color of his scales, as well as the environment around him. You can also easily see the color of the environment from the camp to know which mode he is currently in. This is more useful for the other quests since you start at the camp, but in Blazing Black Twilight you start the quest directly in front of Alatreon after the cutscene, and since Farcasters are disabled throughout this entire quest, you can only get back to camp if you faint. We won't be talking about how he switches between modes yet. This chapter will focus mainly on his weaknesses first. In fire active mode, he is weakest to ice element, followed by water, thunder, dragon, and obviously completely immune to fire. In ice active mode, it's the complete opposite. He is weakest to fire, followed by thunder, water, dragon, and immune to ice. In dragon active mode, he is weakest to dragon but only at 2 stars instead of 3, while the rest of the elements are 1 star. Now in game you can only see the weaknesses in terms of stars, which is not the most accurate representation. If you look at a more detailed weakness chart here, his elemental weakness in each mode is represented by numbers that differ for every body part as well. This chart will be a little confusing at first, and the fonts will be tiny because I can't squeeze everything in. But bear with me as I point out a few important things, and I will zoom in further later, but feel free to pause and zoom if you want to read the chart in detail. I will also link the website I took the chart from. This chart includes every body part in each mode, starting from neutral mode, fire mode, ice mode, and dragon mode. I will explain what neutral mode is later. You can also check which kinsect extract you get from each part. All these numbers are called hit zone values. These here are the raw damage hit zone values affecting cutting damage, blunt damage, and shot damage from ranged weapons. While these here are elemental hit zone values affecting elemental damage. In both cases, the higher the number, the more damage he will receive for that body part. For elemental damage, you will see that his front legs, aka his arms, are the weakest to elements in every scenario and every mode, with ice being 22 on his arms during fire mode, and fire being 22 on his arms during ice mode. These are the highest elemental hit zone values you will find on Alatreon. While Dragon is shown to be 2 stars during Dragon mode, it's really only 14 on the arms, and on other body parts it's worse, while also having worse numbers than other elements in all other modes. In short, Dragon element is the worst element when it comes to dealing elemental damage, while the opposing elements of ice versus fire would be the best, especially when hitting the arms. However, while 22 is still a decent elemental hit zone, the preferable number should be above 25 to be considered a good elemental weak spot. So in reality, Alatreon is not very weak to elemental damage given that 22 is the highest you can find. In fact, Alatreon is much weaker to raw damage as the raw hit zones above 45 are considered raw weak spots. For more raw damage, you can also tenderize the body parts. The number on the top right corner is the raw hit zone after being tenderized. The body is tenderized together with both wings, while both arms are tenderized as one, same for the hind legs. He also takes the same raw damage in all 3 modes. For cutting and blunt weapons, the head has the best raw hit zone, so you can target the head for more raw damage, and target the arms for more elemental damage. For ranged weapons, the body is best for raw damage, while the head and tail offers the best balance between raw and elemental damage after being tenderized. While the arms still have the highest elemental numbers, the raw hit zone is below 45 even after tenderizing, which means it cannot proc weakness exploit. For cutting and blunt weapons, it is not necessary to tenderize the head for more damage due to the small gain in hit zone value, unless you need the 20% extra affinity on tenderized parts from weakness exploit. In all other scenarios, tenderizing would be more beneficial. The parts that can be broken are the horns, wings, and tail. The horns can only be broken when he is in Dragon mode, but we'll talk more about that later. Since we are talking about his weaknesses, it's also important to know that Alatreon also takes about 20% more overall damage when he is enraged. While we did conclude that Alatreon is very weak to raw damage, and not very weak to elemental damage, does this mean we should avoid using elemental weapons? No. We still need elemental weapons because elemental damage is needed to weaken his Escaton Judgement, which will be the next thing we discuss. Escaton Judgement is Alatreon's ultimate attack. At some point during the fight, Alatreon will run to the center of the arena to charge up and release a shockwave that covers the entire arena. He does this when shifting from Dragon mode to Fire mode, which will be a fiery explosion. Or Dragon mode to Ice mode, which will be an icy explosion. While the animation looks like ice or fire, this move does not actually deal elemental damage, so the damage cannot be mitigated by elemental mantles or resistances, it deals fixed damage over time. The damage over time is extremely high, and it's so fast that it is essentially a one-shot attack that you will not be able to out-heal, even with 200 HP. Superman Dive and iframes will not negate the damage, the Palico Vigor Wasp will not revive you if you die to Escaton as well. There is also no escape since Farcasters are disabled throughout the entire fight. In short, it is a death sentence, unless you abandon the quest. The only way to survive the Escaton Judgement is to weaken it, so that the damage is lower and can be out-healed. You do so by dealing elemental damage to Alatreon. When enough elemental damage is dealt, Alatreon will be knocked over. We call this an elemental topple. This can happen in any of his 3 modes, and the topple is a huge opening for players to deal damage. While he is toppled, Alatreon's elemental modes are shut down, so he is in neutral mode, where his elemental weaknesses are more similar to each other. He will regain his elemental mode after standing up. Topples that happen when Alatreon is flying will knock him out of the sky as well, so a well-timed topple could help skip his flying phase. As long as you achieved at least one elemental topple before he uses Escaton Judgement, the Escaton will be weaker and can now be out-healed, so you can survive. You can topple him multiple times before each Escaton, and the handler will say different things.
You're doing a good job containing Alatreon's power. A lot of Alatreon's power is shut down. You've shut down enough of Alatreon's power. Well done, Pard!
Each topple will further weaken the Escaton damage. With 200 HP, this is how the damage looks like. For one topple you still need to heal or you will die. Since Escaton leaves recoverable HP, an Astra Jerky or Sushi Fish Scale is the fastest way to heal. Of course Ancient and Max Potions work too. With 2 topples onwards, you will not die without healing, but it is advisable to heal. After each Escaton, the topple count will reset and you need to topple Alatreon again to survive the next Escaton if it happens. If you are struggling to topple Alatreon, remember that elements are most effective on his arms regardless of his mode, while the best elements are ice versus fire, and vice versa. While we know that different weapon types have different capabilities in elemental output, the game has somewhat balanced it by having different multipliers for each weapon, that affect how much of the elements are counted towards the topple buildup. If you joined halfway through the quest, or simply forgot whether you got the topple, it is very easy to tell the difference between the full-powered Escaton and the weakened Escaton, from both sound and visual effects. The full-powered one has a much louder initial charge-up and a humming noise during the charge-up, along with red energy tendrils firing all over the place. The explosion is also louder and more powerful, but you're already dead when you hear that. The weakened Escaton has a softer initial charge-up, no humming noise during charge-up, weaker red energy and a silent explosion. You can hit him after he lands from this move. Or try some funny things with certain weapons if you have the health regen augment. So since elements are needed to weaken the Escaton, but Alatreon is weaker to raw damage, which one should we prioritize? It depends, but the general idea is, if you are confident that you can topple him with lower elemental damage, then prioritize raw damage for higher damage output. This will likely kill him faster. You only need one topple to survive Escaton anyway. But if you are struggling to topple him, then prioritize higher elements over raw. You can also go for higher elements if you simply prefer to get more topples, since more topples can also lead to more openings for damage. More elements will also help if you need to cover your teammates' elemental output. Going full raw is viable if you can kill him before he uses Escaton, or if you only die to Escaton without running out of feints. But bringing elements will make life easier. Insect glaive users should also remember they can change their Kinsect element, and can even topple Alatreon using only the Kinsect. Next, let's look at the mode shifting cycle. This is potentially one of the more confusing chapters, but I'll try my best to help you understand. Depending on the quest, Alatreon can start in either fire or ice mode, but never in dragon mode. The only quest where Alatreon starts in ice mode is Dawn of the Death Star. In all other quests he starts in fire mode. Regardless of which mode he starts in, he will later shift into dragon mode. When shifting into dragon mode, he will release a small dragon element explosion. We will be calling this move the dragon shift, which will be discussed later. After being in dragon mode for some time, he will then shift into ice or fire mode by performing the Escaton Judgement as mentioned before. The animation will match the element mode he is switching into. By default, he will switch to the opposite element of the previous element, so if he starts in fire, he will shift into dragon, then shift into ice, then dragon, then fire, and it continues with the same pattern until he dies. If he starts in ice, then it's ice, dragon, fire, dragon, ice. As you can see, he will never switch directly between ice and fire mode. He always switches to dragon mode first, then into ice or fire again. Now if he starts in fire mode, and you brought an ice weapon, he will become immune to your weapon's element when he switches into ice mode, which could lead to failure to topple, and the next Escaton will kill you.
Ice element has no effect. You can't shut down Alatreon's power with that.
This is where the horn break comes in. Alatreon's horn can only be broken during Dragon mode, and only one horn each time he enters Dragon mode. By breaking his horn, Alatreon will be unable to switch to the opposite element.
The horns are broken. It doesn't look like he can shift to ice active mode for now.
Now the cycle becomes fire, dragon, and back to fire instead of ice. This ensures that your ice weapon will continue to be effective. This applies to ice mode as well, so it's ice into dragon, and back into ice. His horns are relatively easy to break, but he only has 2 horns, so you can only prevent the switch twice. But if you play it right, you should never see him in both fire and ice modes in the same quest. It's always fire and dragon, or ice and dragon, so you can see that dragon mode is not avoidable in any quest. Many people get confused between the mechanics of horn breaks and elemental topples, which are 2 separate mechanics. Horn breaks prevent him from switching to the opposite element but will not weaken the Escaton, while dealing elemental damage to topple him will weaken the Escaton, but does not prevent the switch to the opposite element. You will need to do both. Those who struggle can try focusing on his arms using ice weapons during his fire mode, then focus on the horns when he switches into dragon mode. The next part will provide a more advanced understanding of his mode cycle, but don't worry about it if it gets confusing. We'll be looking into more details by including his ground and flying mode, as well as an overview of the elemental attacks he can use in each mode, except for physical attacks since he uses those throughout the whole fight. First he will start in ground fire mode, using only fire and lightning attacks. Later he will start flying in fire mode, which we will call fire flight. He will use fire and water attacks during fire flight. He starts fire flight like this, and ends fire flight like this. We will look at the moves in more detail later. For ice mode, he also starts on the ground, using only ice and lightning attacks, then he starts flying in ice mode, which we will call ice flight. He will use ice and water attacks in ice flight. He starts ice flight like this, and ends it like this. Ice and fire flight can be skipped if you deal enough damage quickly and force him to switch into dragon mode before he starts flying. After landing from ice or fire flight, he will then switch into dragon mode on the ground first. Here he will use attacks from the previous ground mode along with dragon attacks, but hasn't unlocked the opposite element yet. Then he will start flying in dragon mode as well, which we will call dragon flight. Dragon flight cannot be skipped. Dragon flight is actually just an enhanced version of ice flight or fire flight, where he uses the same moves but with an additional dragon attack, so I will also call it dragon fire flight, and dragon ice flight to differentiate between the 2 types. The version of dragon flight he will use will always be the opposite of the previous element. So if he came from fire mode, he will use dragon ice flight and vice versa. After landing from dragon flight, he will finally be able to use attacks from both ice and fire, along with dragon and lightning. This is his final form, which is the same in all quests, and is also the final phase before he uses Escaton Judgement. Now that we know exactly how his mode shifting works, let's look at ways to create openings, as well as some general tips. We already know elemental weapons can cause an elemental topple. There are also other ways to create openings, so let's discuss them. The first one is the flinch shot, aka a wallbang. It only works when he is not enraged and only on 3 of these walls around the arena, so it's not always possible and not really worth trying too hard for. However, the first one when the fight starts is usually worth it. When he notices you for the first time, he will roar. Here's the timing to dodge the roar without evade window, but if you plan to use earplugs, only level 5 will make you immune. Rocksteady and Hyper Armor obviously works too. If he tries to do a forward rush when you clutch on, slapping twice from his right will get you the wallbang. However, he can also start with a lightning attack, so you will fall off the head. If you have Rocksteady, then you can stay on and slap him. But this usually means the wallbang will still fail, but you can still try to get it by waiting a bit after the second slap before using the flinch shot. If he does lightning again after you slapped him twice, then likely the wallbang will still miss. I won't go into too much detail when it comes to the wallbang because many other factors can make it inconsistent, like if he is turned to the left when you first discover him, you will also miss. If Alatreon is flying, and he is not enraged, then you can also find an opening to clutch on and use a flinch shot to send him to the ground. We'll call this one the floor bang. Floor bangs are useful since it not only stops him from flying and creates an opening, it's also more consistent than the wall bang. But be careful of certain moves making his elevation too high, which can make the floor bang miss the ground. Alternatively, you can also use a flash pod to drop him from the sky, but he stands up immediately and attacks blindly. If a flash was used recently, then he will be resistant to it and only flinch without falling. If he is enraged, he is completely immune to flashes, and obviously immune to floor bangs. You can utilize smokes to make him lose sight of you. When the mini-map turns purple, shoot any slinger to get his attention, he will land and roar when he discovers you. Do not exit the smoke before he lands, or he will just roar and continue to fly. Speaking of roars, here's the timing for dodging his roar when he is flying. And you can use the roar opening for medium punishes depending on your weapon as well. Alatreon only roars when he discovers you, or when he becomes enraged. Some weapons can also use sleep or paralysis to stop him from flying, he will be dropped back into ground mode. Mounting could help if you really need an extra knockdown, but generally it's not really worth it since it's easy to mess up, and he always flies when you mount him, hurting your teammates below him in the process. The next opening that can be created will be stuns, by dealing impact damage to his head. The animation is different from elemental topples, and the stun duration is shorter, so do not get confused between the two. A well-timed stun can also stop him from flying. You can also stun him using thorn pods, which are only dropped by tenderizing him with light weapons, or heavy weapons with Shaver Jewel. He only drops dragon pods naturally outside of tenderizing. You can use the crystal burst found at the right side of the camp to flinch him when you are in danger. A horn break also provides a short opening, and the animation is fixed. He always leans back to his right and move his head leftward after, so punish accordingly. Breaking his horns when he is flying will not drop him. Just like flinching him in the air, he will just stay airborne. Wallbangs and floor bangs can break the horns easily, but this will skip the horn break animation. Much like breaking his horns when he is already down, or during a claw stagger. While it is okay to block some of his attacks, many of his attacks knock you back severely, even with guard level 5. Some moves require guard up to block 2, so blocking is not recommended. Before we talk about every single attack in detail, let's first have an overview of the types of attacks, their effects such as blights, and which mode they can be used in. First of all, we have physical attacks. These are melee attacks such as swipes and slams using body parts. He can use physical attacks throughout the entire fight in all 3 element modes, in both ground and flying mode. All of Alatreon's physical attacks carry some dragon element and will inflict dragon blight on the hunter.
Your elemental and abnormal status attacks are having no effect. I think you've got dragon blight.
Dragon blight makes your weapon deal only raw damage and 0 elemental damage, shown by the blue outline on damage numbers. Be careful of dragon blight since it can prevent you from getting the topple. Since we mentioned dragon blights, let's discuss the actual dragon elemental attacks, which also inflict dragon blight. These can only be used in dragon mode, both ground and flying. Also, the dragon shift when he shifts into dragon mode, but that is more of a mode shift than an actual attack, so the actual dragon attacks are only available in dragon mode. Next we have lightning attacks, which can be used in all three element modes, but only on the ground, never when flying. Lightning attacks appear as a blue glow on the ground indicating where each lightning bolt will strike after roughly 1 second. Lightning applies Thunderblight, which makes it easier for you to get stunned. Whenever Alatreon uses lightning attacks, his horns will be charged up with lightning. This will not hurt you if you are standing beside his head, but if you clutch onto his head, then you will take damage and get knocked off. Try again after the head no longer has lightning effects. If you have Rocksteady on, you will take continuous damage without being knocked off the head, which is extremely dangerous. The lightning on his head will not apply Thunderblight. Next we have water attacks, which can be used in all three element modes, but only when he is flying, and never on the ground. Water applies Water Blight that slows down your stamina regeneration, and there's a distinct squeaking sound whenever he uses water attacks. Water attacks can sometimes leave water puddles on the ground that look like oil. The puddles do nothing on their own, but when fire attacks touch the water puddles, they turn into flaming puddles that deal damage over time without inflicting any blights. Heat Guard will not prevent the damage. New water puddles touching flame puddles can also spread into new flaming puddles. Flaming puddles disappear after some time, but water puddles will last until the next Escaton unless they turn into flame puddles first. Water attacks comes in two types: water beams and water bullets. The beams and bullets will never be used together since they are exclusive to different flight modes. The water beams are used in Ice Flight and Dragon Ice Flight. The water beams do not leave any puddles in Ice Flight, but will leave puddles in Dragon Ice Flight. The water bullets are used in Fire Flight and Dragon Fire Flight. Water bullets will always leave puddles regardless of mode. Next we will look at fire attacks, which can only be used in Fire mode and Dragon mode, but not in Ice mode. Fire attacks apply Fire Blight, which is basically burning damage over time. Rolling 3 times will remove it. Some fire attacks will visually look like it's mixed with dragon element, but it's actually just fire with no dragon at all since they only inflict Fire Blight. And finally, ice attacks. They can only be used in Ice mode and Dragon mode, but not in Fire mode. Ice attacks apply Ice Blight, which causes your stamina to drain faster. Ice attacks are either freezing mists that deal damage over time, or solid ice shards that will be embedded on the ground where they land. I also call them ice bullets. When planted in the ground, the ice shards will block your movement, and when any lightning touches the shards, they will start glowing red before exploding after roughly 2 seconds. This explosion will not inflict any blights, and will destroy the ice shard. Ice shards also get destroyed by other ice shards replacing their position nearby, or simply because there are too many shards in the arena. Fire and water attacks cannot directly destroy ice shards, but flame puddles will always destroy ice shards. The shards will otherwise stay forever until a fire Escaton destroys them all, but ice Escaton will not destroy them. Hunters cannot destroy ice shards. Since we mentioned all the blights, here's a reminder that eating a nullberry will remove all blights. Level 3 blight resistance makes you completely immune to blights, but level 2 is great since it doesn't make you immune, but greatly reduces the duration and allows you to proc coalescence. The final chapter will be about every attack he uses, so there will be a lot to discuss. With each move I will try my best to show the damage and type of knockdown it does when we get hit. I will also show how to sidestep or dodge the move. All dodge timings are done with 0 evade window. I will also try to showcase possible ways to punish each move. While the punish is going to be different for each weapon due to speed and range, I cannot afford to show every single one, so I will give you the general idea of how big the opening is and provide examples wherever I see fit. I have more footage of the hunting horn simply because I use it the most. Also, all the names for his attacks are just made up. We'll start with ground physical attacks. The paw swipe is a quick attack he generally uses if you are near him and slightly to the side. He will use the arm opposite to the side you're on. The range is short and cannot reach beyond his head, so it's easy to avoid, but dodge if you have to. It can even be avoided through the chest like this. The opening is short and you can use a quick attack when his head returns to the center. You can use slower but stronger punishes if you know how to bait the next move after the swipe. And one of those moves is the headbutt. The headbutt is a quick attack that he often uses if you are near in front of him, although sometimes he can turn around and do it too. The hitbox of this attack includes the center of the chest, but the side of the chest and arms are completely safe zones despite looking like they are used for stomping. The simple way of punishing it is to sidestep and use a medium speed attack. But if you were forced to dodge, you can use a faster attack due to time wasted for dodging. Since he often uses this move when you are in front of him, you can try to bait it after roars or paw swipes to use stronger punishes. Or easily move out of the way if you know it's coming. But this move is very fast, so be careful.
You're doing a good job containing Alatreon's power.
The ground slam is a dangerous move that will pin you down if it hits you. The pin goes through hyper armor and rocksteady. Watch out for the animation when he stands up. He generally uses it if you're near and under him, often after paw swipes and headbutts. The hitbox is his entire upper body, but you're safe at his back legs. It can be dodged with iframes, but I recommend dodging away because getting pinned is extremely dangerous. You can use medium punishes after dodging or sidestepping it. The double head swipe is another move he likes to use if you're near in front of him, which can be recognized by him tilting his head. He can also reposition and turn to face you before using it, and whenever you see him turning to face you like this, it's guaranteed to be a double head swipe. He can use it in both directions, to the left first then to the right, or to the right first then to the left. The hitbox reaches slightly under his chest, but further behind will be a safe zone. You can dodge if you're too near, or move out of position to punish with a medium speed attack when his head comes back to the center. The double tail swipe is rarely used in solo, but he will always turn his back towards you before doing it. It's always to the left, then to the right, while his head looks back from his right. It has a slow animation after turning around, so it has low chances of hitting you. All you need to do is reposition to the front to hit him while he is busy shaking his booty. The forward rush is his repositioning move that deals damage when colliding with the player. He generally rushes away from you to use long-ranged attacks. It's also commonly used when you clutch onto him, and hits multiple times if you have rocksteady on. He can use a short rush, or a long rush, as well as a double rush. The rush is fast, but you can easily see it coming via his body language, where his front legs come together. Sidestep or dodge it, but there's generally no chance to punish this. The dive bomb is a ground attack where he quickly flies and dives towards the player while sliding forward. It can be used on its own, but often used as a follow-up to catch you after you got hit by the previous attack. Due to the size and duration of the hitbox, I recommend dodging out, because dodging through is more difficult to time. Depending on your position and where he lands, you could either get a medium or quick punish unless he slides too far from you. Now let's discuss the flying physical attacks. Firstly, the flying rush is his repositioning move in flying mode, dealing damage if he collides with a player. He uses it to dash around before using other attacks. While the flying rush is fast, it has a slow and obvious wind-up animation before dashing forward. Just avoid it or dodge it, but you won't really get to punish this move as well. The flying slam is one of his most common flying moves, and will also pin you down if it hits you. As usual, the pin goes through hyper armor and rocksteady. He does it up to 2 times when he is not enraged, and up to 3 times when he is enraged. But he will stop as long as he hits his target, or if the target is already down. He can use it directly from afar, but sometimes he will slowly fly towards you before using it. You can avoid it by staying on the move, or you can dodge. He always lowers his head for a moment after this move, so weapons with longer reach can hit his head. This opening is also very safe for a floor bang if he is not enraged. The head and tail sweep combo starts with a short-range head swipe into a longer-range tail sweep. It can be used in both directions, starting from the opposite side of your position. Sometimes he will slowly fly towards you before using it. While both attacks can hit you, you are unlikely to get hit by the head swipe due to its short range, unless you are really near. His head is lowered for a short moment after the attack so you can attack him. You can also clutch on after this attack. The landing dive will end his flying mode by diving towards the ground. The wind-up animation is slow and obvious, so it is unlikely to hit you. This is the ending for Ice Flight and Dragon Ice Flight, so you won't see it in fire mode. You can go for a medium attack if you are near him after he lands. Next up, we will move into Dragon Elemental attacks. The Dragon Explosion has a slow charge up before unleashing an explosion that covers a pretty large area around him. He only uses this in ground dragon mode. You can either stay away or time your dodges to dodge through it. Superman dive if you are not confident with your timing. If you dodge through it, you get a fairly large opening to punish. He looks up before lowering his head during the recovery. The Flying Dragon Explosion is the flying version and only used in Dragon Flight. After charging up, he will fly towards the target before unleashing the explosion, which can be dodged with this timing. After a minor delay, he will lower his head so you can attack him there. If he is not enraged, this is a very safe opening to clutch on as well. Use Superman Dive if you are not confident with your dodge timing. The Dragon Shift is also an explosion that deals Dragon Elemental damage, but unlike other Dragon attacks, this is a fixed move that is used only when he is shifting Elemental mode from Ice into Dragon, or Fire into Dragon, so it is not a proper attack he can use at random. This explosion is smaller and does not reach in front of his head, so you can safely attack in front of his head even during the switch without dodging. But it will still hit you if you are too close to him, so dodge if you must. Many people often confuse the Dragon Shift with the Dragon Explosion, so here are the differences to help you. The Dragon Explosion is a proper attack he can randomly use, but only in Dragon mode. He stands up as his chest glows bright red before pushing his chest out for the explosion, looking upwards before lowering his head. The range is much further and it is not safe to stand right in front of him. The Dragon Shift on the other hand only happens when he switches from ice or fire into Dragon mode. He will repeatedly stomp his feet and shake his head while dark red energy gather around him before exploding and changing his mode. His head is lowered during the explosion and you can safely stand right in front of him, and the overall range is much shorter too. Next we can move on to lightning attacks. He only uses lightning on the ground. The homing lightning strikes places multiple lines of lightning under one specific player. It will track you no matter how far you are. There are 2 lightning strikes when he is not enraged, and 3 lightning strikes when he is enraged. You can easily sidestep these, but dodging works too, especially for weapons with slow movement. Since they track one player, you can lead the lightning away from other players, but keep in mind that the line can be vertical or horizontal randomly. The randomness makes it hard to predict, but you can try to risk using stronger attacks by leading the lightning away first. Or use a weaker attack if you were forced to dodge the last lightning. The lightning storm summons many lightning bolts that either travel outwards or inwards. You can easily tell which version it is by looking at the blue particles. If they travel inwards, the lightning will start further and travel inwards. If the particles travel outwards, then the lightning starts near him and travels outwards. The positions for the lightning strikes are always the same for both versions. For the ones near him, there is one under his head, one beside each arm, one directly on each hind leg and a few more behind. While he stays in place during the summoning, he will raise his upper body and only lower his body once the lightning bolts start appearing, and he will stay still for a short moment after. Use this opening to attack him, but be very mindful of your position since you need to know when and where each lightning will strike, especially since the timing of each lightning strike is different for inwards and outwards despite striking the same spot. The lightning waves will send out 5 lines of lightning that travel forward from Alatreon. Whenever you see him run backwards while spinning like this, he is using this attack. The lightning bolts for each wave have an alternating pattern. He can spin in both directions, depending on which side you stand, but it doesn't change much of how the attack works. It mainly changes the direction in which his head moves during the attack. You can sidestep the lightning, dodge the lightning, and there's even a small safe zone between each lightning bolt. Either way, if you can get near him during this attack, you are given one of the biggest openings to use your strongest attacks. How much time you have depends on how soon you can get near him, so if you are late, adjust accordingly. He doesn't use this move until you've dealt enough damage to him. Next we look at water attacks. He only uses them when flying. We previously established that he has water beams and water bullets used for different flight modes and are never used together. In Ice and Dragon Ice Flight, he uses water beams together with ice bullets instead of water bullets. In Fire and Dragon Fire Flight he uses water bullets together with fire beams instead of water beams. First let's look at water beam attacks. The straight water beam is a simple jet of water traveling forward in a straight line. You can dodge through the beam, or simply avoid the beam. You can't really retaliate if you are far, but if you are near, you can hit him when he lowers his head for a short while after the attack. You can clutch on during or quickly after this move, but you need to be fast. The zigzag water beam is a water jet that travels in a zigzag pattern while he flies forward in a straight line. He always starts the beam from his right, sweeping left and back to the right. Avoid it, or dodge if you have to. Generally it's hard to punish this move since he moves away from you, but if you manage to catch up you can attack him. You can clutch on after this move if you catch up to him. The rotating water beam can either rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. Staying under him is your safest bet during this attack, and you can attack his legs while under him. If you know how, you can also reach for his head while he spins, as well as at the end. You can clutch on after this move. Next are the water bullets. The straight water bullets are 4 water bullets traveling forward in a straight line. You can avoid this attack, but it does not provide much of an opening to hit him unless you're already near. The water shotgun shoots twice, first with 3 bullets, and then with 5 bullets in a spread shot. The second shot lands further than the first. Avoid or dodge if you are far, but it is safe under him, so if you can get near you will be able to attack him after he completes the shots. You can clutch on after this move, but you need to be fast. The water machine gun fires 10 water bullets continuously from his right to left, starting slow and speeding up. Avoid the bullets if you are far. The safe spot is under him and you can attack however you like depending on how soon you can get under him. You can clutch on after this move. Next we talk about fire attacks, starting from the ground. The straight fire beam is a quick long-ranged beam that hits in a straight line. He often uses it after creating some distance, but he can also use it when you are near him. The hitbox starts from under his mouth, so be careful. The wind-up animation is pretty fast so you have to pay attention, use dodge or sidestep depending on your position. You can do a fast or medium attack depending on your distance and position. The sweeping fire beam is also a long-ranged beam, but has a much slower and obvious wind-up animation. He tends to use it from a distance, and always sweeps from his right to left, and the reach is very far. Move towards his left if you can get near him in time, and this allows you to perform strong attacks. But do watch out for the hitbox and try to get behind the head. If you can't get near him in time, you can dodge through the beam, and use whatever time left for a quicker punish. It is possible to clutch on safely if you don't touch the beam. This is also a move he only uses after taking enough damage. Alatreon can shoot a fireball into the ground that creates 3 delayed explosions in an expanding ring of fire. He uses this move when you are near him. It's easy to recognize it as he will stand up to shoot the fireball downwards. The fireball itself can actually hit you if you are at point-blank distance, but it is usually unlikely to hit you. It is the 3 explosions from the ground that are more dangerous, but you can easily avoid them by looking at the patterns on the ground. You can simply avoid the explosions by stepping in, or stepping out if you have to. Dodge with iframes if you're too late to reposition. If you are able to move inwards, you are given a decent amount of time to attack his head. You can also use attacks that move inwards while avoiding the explosions. Alatreon can shoot a fireball forward that hits the ground, and splits into 3 lines of ground explosions that travel forward in different directions. You can get hit directly by the ball, or by the ground explosion. The ball can either explode right in front of his face, or travel slightly further before exploding. The opening is small, so you can use a fast attack to punish him if you are near enough. There is another version of the splitting fireball where he jumps backwards while shooting the fireball. The fireball splits up the same way, but there is an obvious difference in the wind-up animation, where he pulls his head back before shooting the fireball. Since he jumps backwards, it's hard to punish this move. The ball and split can all hit you if you have Rocksteady on. You can dodge or avoid both types of the splitting fireball. There is also a third version that is similar to the jump back version, but instead of staying on the ground, he will start flying after jumping back. This is the attack he uses to start his fire flight, or dragon fire flight. He will not use it in any other situation. Speaking of flying, now let's look at his flying fire attacks, which are used in fire flight and dragon fire flight. We'll start with the fire beams. They replace the water beams and are exactly the same moves but with fire, so it can be dodged or punished exactly the same way. Firstly, he has the straight fire beam, flying version. Next is the zigzag fire beam. And lastly, the rotating fire beam. Additionally, he can also use a downward fire breath that deals damage over time with an expanding hitbox. He uses it when you are under him. I recommend staying away since attacking him is not worth the damage you receive while standing under him, but you could use some of the damage over time to activate Coalescence if you want. You still take damage when clutching onto him. Finally, he has another downward fire breath, but this time, he will land after using it. He uses this move to end his fire flight and dragon fire flight. To know whether he is using the landing version, pay attention to the distinct high-pitched sound he makes before the attack. The landing version also spreads fire all around him when he touches the ground, but this doesn't deal any damage. It is only used to turn all the water puddles into fire puddles from afar. If you have the health regen augment, you can attack him as he lands. Now on to the last element, which is ice attacks, starting from the ground. The freezing cone is a long-ranged attack that deals damage over time. The hitbox travels forward and becomes wider as it gets further from him, but is smaller near him and completely safe beside his head. He can do it from up close, but he often likes to do it from a distance since the wider area from afar makes it more dangerous and harder to get out of. However, since it deals damage over time that doesn't knock you back, it is not really dangerous unless you take too many ticks of damage. 1 or 2 ticks wouldn't hurt much and can be used to activate Coalescence. This move is one of the best and biggest openings since it has a very long attack and recovery animation. So go ahead and use your strongest attacks as long as you are able to get near him in time. Health regen augment will easily allow you to sustain through the damage over time. Just be careful not to overcommit. The downward ice breath, ground version, will have him flying up momentarily to breathe ice downwards, dealing damage over time with an expanding hitbox, before landing back on the ground. It starts with one of the slowest and most obvious wind-ups, with a distinct sound. You can start attacking him during the wind-up, during the attack, and during the recovery after he lands. This gives you a huge opening to punish, and the ticks can help activate Coalescence. But this is only ideal if you have the health regen augment and enough health to sustain through the damage over time. If you don't, then you can clutch onto him safely without taking any damage, or simply move away from the ice. The straight ice bullets, ground version, is a simple fast attack that fires an ice bullet in a straight line. This will leave multiple ice shards on the ground in its path, 4 to be precise. It is possible to dodge through the ice bullet, but I would recommend just sidestepping it. This has the same animation as the splitting fireball, so you can use a quick attack if you are near enough. Another version of the straight ice bullets will have him running away, and flying momentarily to shoot the 4 ice bullets in a straight line towards the ground. It's easy to avoid the attack, but it is hard to punish this move since he runs away from you, but be on the ready as he can either chain it into long-ranged moves, or dive at you right after. The ice shotgun, ground version, is a double spread shot with 3 bullets followed by 5 bullets that leave ice shards on the ground. The second shot lands further than the first. He usually uses this from medium to long distances. If you can get near him in time, there is a safe zone right in front of him where the bullets cannot hit you, allowing you to use stronger attacks. If dodging is required, use faster attacks. He only starts using this attack after taking enough damage. Alatreon starts hovering in the air and spraying ice towards the sky. This causes the ceiling to start freezing and dropping ice shards on random spots at regular intervals, over 30 seconds. You can easily tell where the ice shards will land. There will be a red line with snowflakes indicating the landing spot, and will hit you if directly landed on you. He starts flying after this move, which is how he starts his ice flight and dragon ice flight, so he will not use it in other scenarios. Since he stays still for a long time while spraying, you can use the opening to sharpen, buff up, attack him from below, or clutch onto him to tenderize. But do not immediately floorbang him, or he would just start flying again. Always let him perform one flying move before the floorbang if you want him to stay on the ground.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
Lastly, we're looking at the flying ice attacks, used in Ice Flight and Dragon Ice Flight. We'll start with the ice bullets. They replace the water bullets and are exactly the same moves but with ice, and leaves ice shards instead of water puddles. So they can be dodged or punished exactly the same way. Firstly, the straight ice bullets, flying version. Next is the ice shotgun, flying version. Next is the ice machine gun. For the last flying ice move, we have the downward ice breath, flying version. This version is done directly from the air, and he will not land after using it. He uses it when you are below him, and you will not take damage when clutching onto him during this attack. Since he does not land, I do not recommend tanking it except for activating Coalescence. Unlike the downward fire breath, there's no reason to get confused between the two downward ice attacks since one is only used on the ground, and the other is only used when flying. And that concludes every single attack used by Alatreon. This also concludes the entire video. I hope this has helped you in some way. Thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.